Innocence, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, is a commodity with a steep price, one the Imperium exacts with chilling, ruthless efficiency. Deep within the sprawling, lightless underhive of Necro and Danda, a child whose eyes have never known the warmth of natural sunlight learns the intricate mechanics of a laser gun. Her nimble fingers, tiny enough to navigate the weapon's most delicate internal components, disassemble and reassemble with the practiced precision typically found in someone twice her chronological age, all in a blistering 14 seconds. She possesses no true name, only the cold numerical designation given by the Manufactorum Overseers, 77 Delta. Upon completing her daily quota of 40 weapons, her reward is a ration bar, a bland block tasting invariably of recycled protein and the acrid tang of industrial lubricant. The other children on the assembly line maintain a stoic silence around her. They learned long ago that friendship is a perilous luxury, a bond that invariably draws the unwanted attention of the taskmasters, and attention from the taskmasters invariably means pain. This particular girl is merely 8 years old. In just 3 short years, she will be deemed old enough to heft the very weapons she now assembles. In 5, she will carry one into the brutal maw of battle. And in 7, should she somehow endure the endless conflicts, she will be tasked with teaching other children the myriad ways to die for the Emperor. The Imperium does not categorize this as child labor. It terms it, with chilling detachment, early vocational training. The distinction between child labor and early vocational training is not a mere semantic quibble. It is a foundational doctrinal truth, etched into the very bedrock of imperial law with the same fanatical fervor that once raised cathedrals of terror across the galaxy. Children are not perceived as vulnerable workers. They are vital investments. They are not fledgling soldiers. They are future assets. They are not victims to be pitied. They are blessed with a singular purpose long before their young minds can possibly grasp what purpose truly entails. The Schola Progenium, with its vast network of institutions, stands as the Imperium's most visible monument to this harrowing philosophy. Yet, it is far from the sole institution that ruthlessly preys upon young minds and bodies. From the sprawling, smoke-stacked forge worlds of the Adeptus Mechanicus to the unforgiving death worlds that churn out the Imperial Guard's most hardened regiments, the insatiable machinery of war devours children with an appetite that would put even the great devourer itself to shame. Yet, the Imperium does not merely consume children, it fundamentally transforms them. It sanctifies their suffering, twisting their pain into a perverse form of devotion. It molds them to be profoundly grateful for the mere chance to bleed for its cause. On the agri-world of Morven Prime, children as young as 6 are forced to endure grueling 18-hour shifts within the cavernous grain processing plants that nourish 3 entire sectors of the Imperium. Their small, nimble hands are considered perfect for reaching into the complex machinery when it inevitably jams, clearing blockages that would otherwise necessitate the deployment of expensive servitors. Their lightweight bodies can squeeze through constricted ventilation shafts to perform vital maintenance. The impassive overseers constantly tell them they are heroes, that every single grain of wheat they process could potentially feed a space marine, that their endless sacrifice is what keeps the Imperium strong. When a child is tragically crushed in the unforgiving gears of the machinery, a grim occurrence every few weeks, the overseers conduct a brief, perfunctory ceremony. They solemnly inform the remaining children that the deceased has been blessed by the Emperor, that their small life and violent end have found profound meaning. They conspicuously omit the detail that the child's body will subsequently be processed into protein paste, destined for the following week's rations. The children, utterly devoid of any alternative perspective, believe them without question. Why wouldn't they? They have never known a world where adults offered them different, uncomfortable truths. In the abyssal depths of Hive Tert on Armageddon, children too young to even properly wield a rifle are summarily pressed into service as ammunition runners. They dart frantically between fortified trenches and makeshift bunkers, laden with bandoliers of bullets and heavy power packs for laser guns. Their diminutive size, a macabre advantage, makes them notoriously harder targets for enemy snipers. The Astro Militarum, in a chilling turn of phrase, affectionately calls them little eagles, a term of endearment that thinly veils a grim economic calculus. A child killed while ferrying ammunition represents a calculated loss of 37 Throne-Gelt in equipment and perhaps a mere 6 months of basic training. Conversely, a fully trained guardsman killed while retrieving his own ammunition signifies a far greater loss. 14 years of rigorous conditioning, 3 years of specialized training, and approximately 4,000 Throne-Gelt in equipment and costly medical augmentation. The mathematics are starkly undeniable. The children, however, do not comprehend these cold equations. They understand only that the older, hardened soldiers smile when bullets arrive swiftly, and that their speed directly correlates with their own survival. Some, driven by sheer desperation and the ever-present threat of punishment, begin to run faster than humanly possible, their small hearts hammering under the influence of potent stimulants injected by medics, all to keep them useful. Their life expectancy plummets to a mere 18 months, yet their efficiency dramatically spikes by 23%. The Departamento Munitorum, in its detached, bureaucratic fashion, files these statistics under operational improvements. However, it is within the hallowed or unhallowed halls of the Schola Progenium that the Imperium's systematic use of children achieves something disturbingly close to artistry. The sprawling network of orphanages that blight every world in the Imperium serve as far more than mere educational institutions. They are, in truth, factories for the relentless production of unwavering faith, workshops dedicated to forging a loyalty so pure and absolute that it transcends the very bounds of reason itself. The children who enter these bleak institutions arrive burdened by the crushing weight of their parents' deaths. Most often, parents who perished in dutiful service to the Emperor. They come broken, deeply traumatized, desperate to find some semblance of meaning in a universe that has mercilessly stripped away everything they once held dear. The Scala, far from healing these gaping wounds, masterfully weaponizes them. Sister Superior Mordian observes the newest batch of arrivals as they file into the stark orientation hall of the Schola Progenium on Vos Prime. 23 children, their ages ranging from a tender 7 to a slightly older 13, their young faces bearing the hollow, haunted stare of fresh grief. She has witnessed this exact expression thousands of times over her 4-decade career as an instructor. It is the unmistakable look of children who have profoundly learned that safety is a fragile illusion, that love can be violently ripped away in an instant, that the universe is an impossibly vast, cruel, and utterly indifferent entity to their suffering. In the secular institutions of ancient Terra, such children would have been offered therapy, comfort, and the crucial time to process their trauma. The Schola, however, offers something it deems far more valuable: the indelible chance to transform their searing pain into an unshakable purpose. The orientation commences not with solace, but with prayer. Not the gentle, soothing prayers designed to calm a child's fears, but the harsh, unforgiving, demanding liturgies of the imperial creed. The children are compelled to kneel on cold, unforgiving stone floors for 2 agonizing hours, their young voices growing hoarse from reciting words and phrases they do not yet comprehend. Their knees bleed through worn fabric. Their voices crack with exhaustion and despair. Some weep silently, desperately attempting to conceal their tears. Sister Superior Mordian observes them with an unnerving, calculating gaze, meticulously noting which children stoically endure the discomfort without complaint, which ones instinctively try to aid their weaker neighbors, and, most importantly, which ones exhibit the nascent signs of the fervent fanaticism that will eventually make them the most useful, unswerving servants of the Emperor. Following prayer comes education, though the Schola's definition of education would be utterly unrecognizable to teachers from more civilized, bygone ages. The children learn to read, but only the most sacred texts and dense military manuals. They learn mathematics, but solely as it applies to calculating firing solutions and optimizing supply logistics. They learn history, but exclusively the glorious, often embellished victories of the Imperium and the bitter, devastating price of heresy. Most crucially, they are systematically taught to perceive themselves not as unique individuals, but as expendable, interchangeable components within the colossal, inexorably grinding machine of imperial glory. Their given names are swiftly replaced with cold, numerical designations. Their meager personal belongings are confiscated and ritually burned. Their cherished memories of life before the Schola are gradually, insidiously eroded through careful, sophisticated, psychological conditioning, which the instructors euphemistically term spiritual purification. The children adapt, for children possess an astonishing, tragic capacity to adapt to even the most brutal circumstances. They learn to find a twisted form of comfort in rigid routine, strength in unyielding discipline, and a new identity in unquestioning service. By the time they reach 10 years of age, most can no longer recall what their own parents looked like. By 12, they cannot conceive of desiring anything other than to serve the Emperor with their every breath. By 14, they are not only ready, but eager to die for him without a flicker of hesitation. And they, in their indoctrinated state, consider this chilling readiness the greatest gift they could possibly possess. Some among them are selected for the Adepta Sororitas, where their nascent faith will be forged into a weapon as lethal and precise as any bolter. Others join the Adeptus Arbites, their unswerving loyalty weaponized to enforce imperial law with uncompromising brutality. A select few, the most promising and utterly devoid of empathy, are chosen for the Officio Assassinorum, where their childhood trauma will be painstakingly refined into perfect, emotionless killing machines. But the vast majority will eventually join the sprawling, labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Adeptus Administratum, where they will spend their entire lives diligently processing the endless paperwork that transforms living beings into mere statistics, vital resources into cold quotas, and unimaginable suffering into nothing more than acceptable losses. They will perform this soul-crushing work with an unsettling joy, for they have been thoroughly taught that there is no higher calling, no greater purpose than to serve the emperor. And they will never once question whether the emperor they serve bears any resemblance to the ancient, benevolent figure who once walked among humanity with compassion in his heart. This profound transformation, however, is not without its hidden costs. The Schola's confidential medical records, interred deep within archives, accessible to only a select few, paint a starkly different picture than the glorifying propaganda films that depict imperial education. Suicide rates among Schola students run a staggering 17% higher than the imperial average. Incidents of self-harm occur at a rate of 3 per day, even in smaller facilities. Psychological breakdown, officially classified as spiritual weakness in imperial documentation, afflicts nearly 30% of students before they even reach graduation. These horrifying statistics are not concealed out of shame, but rather for reasons of operational security. The Imperium cannot afford for its myriad enemies to know that its most fanatically loyal servants are, in fact, also its most profoundly psychologically damaged. On the oppressive forge world of Riser, children earmarked for the Adeptus Mechanicus undergo modifications that would be universally considered abominations on any truly civilized world. The youngest initiates, some barely out of infancy, receive their very first mechanical implants long before their tender bones have finished growing. The grueling surgery is performed without the mercy of anesthesia, not as an act of casual cruelty, but as a severe test of their devotion to the Omnissiah. The children who shriek and cry are summarily marked as weak. Those who endure in stoic silence are marked for advancement, and the rare, unsettling few who manage to smile during the procedure are marked for true greatness. By the time these children reach adolescence, they retain precious little that could still genuinely be termed human. Their emotions have been systematically dampened by invasive neural implants. Their memories have been selectively edited, meticulously excised to remove any distracting experiences of love, play, or innocent wonder. Their organic bodies have been systematically replaced, piece by agonizing piece, with mechanical components that serve the Omnissiah's will far more efficiently than fragile flesh ever could. They do not mourn their lost humanity, for they have been rigorously taught that humanity itself is a weakness, that flesh is corruption, and that the highest, most sacred aspiration of any thinking being is to cast off the limitations of biology in favor of the pure, unyielding efficiency of the machine. These children, transformed into living machines, will grow up to design the monstrous weapons that will extinguish millions of lives, to construct the colossal ships that will ferry countless soldiers to their deaths on distant, forgotten worlds, and to meticulously calculate the optimal ratios of human suffering required to maintain imperial productivity at maximum efficiency. They will perform this work with the same cold, absolute emotional detachment with which they once endured their own horrific surgeries, for they have been systematically stripped of the very capacity to feel empathy for organic life. The tech priests who oversee their chilling training maintain detailed records of the entire modification process, not out of any antiquated scientific curiosity, but solely to optimize the conversion of future children. They have scientifically determined that the optimal age for initial implantation is precisely 4 years and 7 months, a period when the child's personality is still highly malleable, yet their motor functions have developed sufficiently to handle basic mechanical interfaces. They have coldly calculated that children who retain fond memories of their parents require a full 17% more reconditioning than orphans. They have discovered that children who show artistic inclinations respond poorly to emotional dampening and should therefore be redirected toward purely technical, less emotionally demanding specializations. These horrifying calculations are performed by adults who were themselves once children, subjected to the exact same brutal process. Their own childhood wonder and natural compassion systematically transformed into cold, calculating efficiency by the very system they now diligently perpetuate. But perhaps nowhere is the Imperium's use of children more systematically cruel, more profoundly agonizing, than in the recruitment and subsequent training of its psychers. The dreaded black ships, spectral leviathans that prowl the vast reaches of the galaxy in relentless search of psychically gifted individuals, make no distinction whatsoever between adults and children. A 6-year-old who accidentally sets her bedroom ablaze with an uncontrolled burst of pyrokinetic energy is considered as much a dire threat to Imperial stability as a 40-year-old rogue psyker who deliberately summons demons for personal gain. Both will be collected with the same chilling, ruthless efficiency. The children seized by the black ships face an ordeal that shatters most adult minds. Chained in psychically dampening cells that suppress their burgeoning abilities so thoroughly that many forget how to even speak, they are transported across the galaxy to Terra itself, in voyages that can agonizingly last for months or even years. The ship's holds are crammed with hundreds of psychers, their collective psychic screams creating a constant, cacophonous background of mental anguish that frequently drives many of the ship's crew to madness. The children, tragically lacking the psychological defenses and coping mechanisms of adults, suffer far more intensely than any other passengers. Many of them simply perish during the journey, their young minds quite literally shutting down under the unbearable weight of terror and profound isolation. Those who miraculously survive the harrowing voyage face trials on Terra that make the Schola Progenium seem merciful by comparison. On the throne world, they are subjected to brutal, intrusive psychological testing that meticulously determines their ultimate, irreversible fate. The strongest and most psychically stable are selected for training as sanctioned psychers, a process that involves years of relentless mental conditioning, specifically designed to transform their raw, volatile psychic talent into a precise weapon the Imperium can safely deploy. The weaker ones are fed to the Golden Throne, their very souls consumed to maintain the psychic beacon that guides Imperial ships through the treacherous warp. The absolute weakest are simply executed, their potential threat to Imperial security deemed far too great to be ignored. The children selected for sanctioned psyker training endure conditioning that would shatter most adult minds. They are forced to witness their fellow students die in horrific training exercises, learning to view psychic death as an acceptable, even necessary, cost of their brutal education. They are subjected to artificial possession by carefully controlled demon entities, a terrifying ordeal designed to teach them to resist warp corruption through direct exposure to its most seductive, insidious temptations. They are forced to use their burgeoning powers to kill live subjects, typically condemned criminals or captured heretics, learning to overcome any natural reluctance to take life. By the time their arduous training is complete, these children have become perfect, living weapons in human form. Their empathy has been meticulously excised, replaced with absolute, unswerving loyalty to Imperial doctrine. Their natural curiosity has been brutally channeled into narrow, specialized fields that serve only military objectives. Their capacity for joy has been utterly suppressed, leaving only a grim, cold satisfaction in duty well performed. They are no longer children in any meaningful sense, though their physical bodies may still be young. They are tools, painstakingly crafted from human raw material, yet shaped entirely by the implacable needs of the Imperium. The Imperium, in its endless propaganda, celebrates these horrifying transformations as triumphs of human will over chaotic corruption. The children themselves, those who retain enough individual consciousness to still form opinions, chillingly agree with this assessment. They have been indoctrinated to believe that their suffering was absolutely necessary, that their lost innocence was a small, justifiable price to pay for the immense privilege of serving the Emperor, and that their profound psychological destruction was, in fact, a glorious form of spiritual rebirth. They believe these lessons without question, for they have never, in their entire existence, been given any reason to doubt them. In the vast labyrinthine libraries of the Adeptus Administratum, clerks, many of whom were once Schola Progenium students themselves, diligently compile reports on the efficiency of child utilization across the breadth of imperial space. They meticulously calculate optimal ratios of education to indoctrination. They painstakingly measure the correlation between childhood trauma and adult loyalty. They coldly project future manpower needs based on current mortality rates among juvenile workers. Their reports are drafted in the dry, clinical language of bureaucracy, devoid of any discernible emotion. But behind every single statistic lies a child's broken dreams. Every percentage point represents thousands of young lives ruthlessly consumed by the ever-grinding imperial war machine. These clerks perform their work with the same mechanical precision they learned as children. Their capacity for emotional response to human suffering, carefully excised through years of systematic conditioning. They see nothing inherently wrong with treating children as renewable resources because they have been trained since their own childhoods to perceive all human life solely in terms of its utility to the Imperium. They are not monsters, not in the traditional sense. They are the chilling, perfected products of a system that meticulously transforms natural human compassion into cold, unfeeling efficiency. And they execute their duties with the unsettling satisfaction of craftsmen who have utterly perfected their trade. On distant, blood-soaked battlefields, child soldiers march in lockstep alongside adult guardsmen, their small hands clutching weapons nearly as tall as they are. They have been given powerful stimulant injections to artificially increase their aggression and subjected to neural conditioning to suppress their natural fear responses. Many of them will not live to see their 15th birthday, yet they face death with the same grim, unyielding determination as veterans twice their age. They sing imperial hymns as they charge headlong into enemy positions, their young, fragile voices rising above the thunderous roar of artillery and the screams of dying men. The adult soldiers who fight alongside them have learned, through brutal experience, not to form emotional attachments to these children. Experience has taught them that the young ones invariably die first, their inexperience and small stature making them tragically easy targets for enemy fire. But the children's zealous enthusiasm for battle serves a purpose beyond their meager military effectiveness. Their raw willingness to die often inspires the adults to even greater acts of courage. Their unshakable faith, despite their short lives, serves as a stark, powerful reminder to hardened veterans of why they continue to fight. In the cold, calculating equations of imperial command, a child who dies gloriously serves the emperor far more effectively than one who lives cautiously. After each brutal battle, the survivors meticulously help bury the dead children alongside the fallen adults, offering the same prayers and performing the same somber rituals. The Departamento Munitorum records their deaths with the same bureaucratic precision used for any other imperial asset lost in combat. Their names, when they are remembered at all, are carved into memorial stones that list them alongside the adults who died beside them, making no distinction whatsoever between the seasoned warrior and the child who should have been learning to read instead of learning to kill. The families of these children, when such families still exist, receive the same death benefits paid to the families of adult soldiers. The official letters of condolence use the same formal, detached language, praising the child's courage and unwavering dedication to imperial service. These letters conspicuously avoid mentioning that the child died screaming for their mother, or that they spent their last agonizing moments desperately trying to crawl to safety through mud made from their own blood. Such raw, harrowing details would serve no purpose beyond causing additional, unnecessary grief to bereaved families. In the lightless depths of hive cities, children toil in munitions factories where a single tiny mistake could trigger catastrophic explosions, killing hundreds. Their small, nimble fingers are prized for their unparalleled ability to handle the most delicate components of explosive devices. Their natural agility allows them to work at a furious pace, often faster than adult laborers. The factory overseers provide them with a constant supply of stimulants to keep them unnaturally alert during grueling 20-hour shifts, knowing full well that fatigue inevitably leads to accidents, and accidents lead to production delays that could severely impact critical supply lines across entire subsectors. The children who labor in these suffocating factories develop a host of respiratory diseases from constant exposure to toxic chemicals, suffer nervous system damage from handling unstable compounds, and develop profound psychological disorders from the relentless stress of knowing that any moment could be their last. The Adeptus Mechanicus medical staff assigned to these facilities treat their debilitating conditions with the same cold, clinical detachment they would show toward malfunctioning machinery. Lung scarring is addressed with surgical modifications that increase oxygen efficiency. Nerve damage is corrected with bionic implants that restore motor function. Psychological trauma is treated with powerful chemical mood stabilizers that systematically eliminate fear responses while maintaining crucial work productivity. These treatments are not provided out of any semblance of compassion, but purely out of economic necessity. A child worker represents a significant investment in training and conditioning, and allowing them to die from preventable medical conditions would constitute a wasteful expenditure of imperial resources. The children themselves are rigorously taught to be grateful for the medical attention they receive, to perceive their mechanical modifications as precious gifts that allow them to serve the emperor more effectively. Many of them do feel genuine gratitude. Their understanding of their horrific situation, shaped entirely by pervasive imperial propaganda, and their absolute lack of exposure to any alternative perspectives. The most promising of these child workers are often selected for advancement to supervisory positions, where they will, in turn, oversee the next generation of juvenile laborers. These promoted children frequently display a particular unsettling cruelty toward their former peers. driven by a profound psychological need to justify their own past suffering by ensuring that others endure the very same hardships. They implement brutal productivity improvements that increase work quotas while simultaneously reducing safety measures, coldly calculating that higher mortality rates are perfectly acceptable if they result in greater overall output. The cycle perpetuates itself with horrifying mathematical precision. Children brutalized by the system grow up to become its most zealous and enthusiastic enforcers. Their own traumatic experiences are transformed into weapons they wield against the next generation. They see no alternative to this brutal pattern because they have never been shown one. They cannot even begin to imagine a world where children are valued for their inherent potential rather than their immediate utility, because such a world simply does not exist within the confines of their grim experience. In the ornate cathedral schools of shrine worlds, children kneel for hours upon cold, hard stone floors in fervent prayer, their young knees bleeding through worn fabric. They are forced to memorize scripture that relentlessly teaches them to embrace suffering as the only true path to spiritual enlightenment, to view their searing pain not as signs of abuse, but as irrefutable evidence of the Emperor's divine love. The myriad scars that crisscross their backs from ritual flagellation are worn with a perverse pride, visible proof of their unyielding devotion to imperial doctrine. Many of them will carry these physical scars for the remainder of their adult lives. Constant, painful reminders of a childhood spent learning to worship their own suffering. The priests who oversee their harsh education were themselves raised in similar, unforgiving institutions. Their capacity for compassion systematically destroyed through decades of relentless indoctrination. They genuinely believe, with absolute conviction, that the suffering they inflict upon children is truly necessary for their spiritual development, that physical pain purifies the soul and prepares young minds to receive divine truth. They can recite extensive theological justifications for their brutal practices, drawing upon millennia of imperial doctrine to support their methods. These priests meticulously keep detailed records of their students' progress, measuring spiritual advancement through their tolerance for physical discomfort and their fervent enthusiasm for self-inflicted punishment. Children who demonstrate exceptional dedication to these horrifying practices are marked for advancement to positions within the ecclesiarchy, where they will spend their adult lives perpetuating the very same cycle of sanctified abuse they experienced in their youth. The most gifted may even be selected for training as drill abbots, specialists in systematically breaking down individual identity and replacing it with absolute, unquestioning submission to imperial authority. The entire process of creating these religious authorities requires the systematic, total destruction of everything that makes childhood precious. Curiosity is mercilessly replaced with blind faith. Creativity is ruthlessly channeled into elaborate forms of self-punishment. The natural, innate desire for love and acceptance is violently redirected toward an emperor who demands everything and in return gives nothing. The children who survive this brutal process become perfect, unthinking servants of the imperial creed. But in any meaningful sense, they cease to be recognizably human. In the deepest, most heavily guarded vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus, tech priests conduct experiments on children that would horrify even the most hardened Imperial Guard veteran. These experiments are not random acts of sadism, but rather carefully controlled research projects, meticulously designed to determine optimal methods for converting human consciousness into machine logic. The children chosen for these grim experiments are typically failed students of the Schola Progenium, individuals who once displayed a flicker of promise during initial screening but were ultimately deemed unsuitable for standard imperial service. The procedures involve the gradual, agonizing replacement of organic neural tissue with cold mechanical components, meticulously monitoring the subject's retention of memory, personality, and core cognitive functions at each harrowing stage of the conversion. Crucially, these children are kept conscious throughout most of the ordeal, their reactions and responses diligently recorded for meticulous analysis. Those rare few who maintain psychological stability through such extensive mechanical modification are celebrated as successful test subjects, their resilience a testament to the process. Conversely, those who succumb to mental breakdown are coldly classified as useful failures, their data nevertheless contributing valuable refinements to future conversion protocols. The tech priests who oversee these experiments consider their work to be sacred, acts of profound devotion to the Omnissiah that will, they believe, ultimately benefit all of humanity by advancing the knowledge of human-machine integration. They uphold intricate theoretical frameworks that rationalize the children's suffering as an indispensable component of scientific progress, akin to the stress testing performed on mere mechanical components. For them, the children's pain is simply data, their fear, a variable to be controlled, their very humanity, an obstacle to be systematically overcome in the relentless pursuit of perfect machine consciousness. Some of these experiments regrettably produce subjects who retain just enough human consciousness to fully grasp the horrific extent of what has been inflicted upon them. These partial converts often plead for the release of death, their remaining emotional centers utterly overwhelmed by the horror of their mechanical transformation. The tech priests typically respond to such desperate pleas by surgically removing the subject's capacity for emotional distress, viewing their psychological anguish as mere evidence of incomplete conversion rather than any grounds for mercy. The subjects who endure this final, brutal modification become chilling exemplars of imperial efficiency. Human intelligence guided purely by machine logic, utterly devoted to the Omnissiah's will, and completely incapable of experiencing regret for what they have irrevocably lost. Across the vast width and breadth of imperial space, the machinery of childhood consumption operates with relentless, soulless efficiency. Orphanages funnel traumatized children directly into military service. Sprawling industrial complexes consume juvenile workers like ammunition in a protracted, endless siege. Religious institutions twist natural childhood wonder into fanatical, unwavering devotion. Military academies transform innocent playground games into brutal training for systematic violence. Even medical facilities engage in experimental procedures that reduce children to mere laboratory specimens. Each institution, though operating according to its own cold logic, ultimately serves the same grim purpose, converting every last drop of human potential into raw imperial power. The administrators who oversee these vast, interlocking systems regularly file reports on their efficiency, measuring success strictly in terms of output rather than any human cost. A Schola Progenium that graduates 90% of its students to imperial service is lauded as more successful than one graduating only 80%, utterly disregarding the psychological damage inflicted upon the survivors. A munitions factory that boosts production by 15% is commended for operational excellence. even if this improvement comes at the direct cost of worker safety and shortened life expectancy. These chilling reports are penned by adults who were themselves products of this very same system. Their childhood experiences of systematic brutalization transmuted into professional expertise in managing similar institutions. They possess the chilling ability to calculate the optimal age for commencing military training, the most effective methods for breaking down individual identity, and even the precise dosage of chemicals required to enhance productivity without causing immediate death. Their expertise is undeniably genuine, and their dedication to imperial service is absolute. Yet, their humanity was sacrificed long ago on the altar of institutional efficiency. The children currently suffering within these institutions will, in time, grow up to become the next generation of administrators, their own traumatic experiences providing them with intimate, first-hand knowledge of the most effective methods for processing human raw material into useful imperial servants. They will implement improvements based on their personal understanding of precisely what breaks the human spirit most efficiently, their childhood suffering transformed into professional qualifications for managing similar programs. The cycle endures because it must. The Imperium demands a steady, unceasing supply of fanatically loyal servants, individuals who will sacrifice everything for the Emperor's glory without hesitation or regret. Such absolute devotion cannot be merely taught to adults who retain memories of alternatives. It must be profoundly instilled in children before they ever develop the capacity to question the brutal system that shapes them. The brutalization of childhood is not some unfortunate side effect of imperial necessity. It is, in fact, the very foundation upon which the entire colossal structure of imperial civilization rests. In the end, the children who survive their transformation into imperial servants often express a deeply disturbing gratitude for their experiences. They have been meticulously taught to view their suffering as a sacred gift, their lost innocence as a profound sacrifice that bestowed meaning upon their lives. They are rendered utterly incapable of imagining any existence other than unwavering service to the Emperor, having been systematically prevented from developing the capacity to envision alternatives. Their grim contentment with their fate is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of their conditioning, evidence of a system so perfectly calibrated that it convinces its very victims to embrace their own destruction. The Imperium's pervasive use of children in war extends far beyond the simple deployment of young soldiers on active battlefields. It encompasses a vast, intricate network of institutions, practices, and ideologies that systematically identify, collect, process, and deploy human juveniles as vital resources in the eternal, relentless struggle against the enemies of mankind. This chilling system operates with such thoroughness and terrifying efficiency that most imperial citizens never even question its necessity, viewing the consumption of childhood as simply another immutable aspect of the natural order. Every imperial world contributes to this system in its own unique way, shaped by local conditions, but always guided by universal, unforgiving principles established in the earliest, darkest days of the Imperium. Hive worlds, with their teeming, endless populations, provide vast masses of expendable workers and soldiers, their sheer numbers ensuring that individual lives carry minimal value. Agri-worlds contribute children hardened by rural labor and accustomed to the harsh, unforgiving realities of survival. Forge worlds supply juveniles who have already begun the gradual, painful process of replacing flesh with cold machinery. Death worlds offer children who have learned to kill before they even learn to read. Each world type, in its own grim way, produces its specialized contribution to the Imperial war machine, but all serve the same ultimate, merciless purpose. The Adeptus Administratum maintains detailed, chilling projections of juvenile resource availability across the entire Imperium, meticulously calculating expected yields from each world based on population growth, mortality rates, and recruitment quotas. These projections are updated annually, scrupulously adjusted for local conditions such as planetary wars, industrial accidents, and even religious festivals that might affect the supply of available children. The bureaucrats who compile these reports work with the same methodical precision they apply to managing supplies of ammunition or rations, viewing children as another form of renewable resource that must be carefully managed to ensure optimal utilization. Regional variations in child utilization naturally reflect local military needs and cultural traditions. In the segmentum solar, for instance, children are more likely to be channeled into administrative roles or specialized technical positions, their education emphasizing bureaucratic efficiency and technological competence. In the Eastern Fringe, where incessant Tyranid invasions create a constant, ravenous demand for expendable soldiers, children are more commonly trained for direct combat roles. In the Eye of Terror's periphery, where the insidious corruption of chaos poses constant existential threats, children undergo even more intensive psychological screening and conditioning to ensure their loyalty remains absolute under extreme, unimaginable stress. Yet beneath these superficial regional variations lies a consistent, horrifying pattern: the systematic conversion of natural human development into stark imperial utility. Children who might have become artists are instead molded into propagandists. Those who might have become teachers are transformed into indoctrinators. Children who might have become healers become torturers in the service of imperial security. Children who might have become explorers are conscripted as soldiers, sent to die on distant worlds they will never understand. The transformation is so utterly complete that most imperial citizens cannot even conceive of alternative uses for children. When presented with historical accounts of ancient societies that valued childhood innocence or encouraged creative play, most Imperials react with confusion or even outright disgust. They view such practices as wasteful, even morally repugnant, a squandering of valuable human resources that could have been put to productive use. Their inherent inability to see children as anything other than raw material for imperial industry reflects the terrifying success of a conditioning process that began in their own childhood and continues relentlessly throughout their adult lives. This profound conditioning operates at every single level of imperial society, from the lowest hive worker to the highest planetary governor. Imperial law nominally provides extensive protections for adult citizens against arbitrary detention, forced labor, and physical abuse. Yet these very same protections do not, under any circumstances, extend to children. Imperial legal doctrine chillingly asserts that children are not yet fully human, that they exist in a state of potential humanity that must be actualized through unwavering service to the Emperor. This legal framework thus enables the systematic, sanctioned exploitation of juveniles, while meticulously maintaining the convenient fiction that imperial society respects human dignity and individual rights. The religious foundations of this system run even deeper than mere legal doctrine. Imperial theology teaches that the emperor loves humanity most when it sacrifices itself for his glory, and that the purest form of sacrifice is the offering of innocence on the altar of duty. Children who perish in imperial service are not viewed as victims of an oppressive system, but rather as glorious martyrs whose deaths bring them closer to the emperor's divine, eternal presence. Their suffering is not considered evidence of institutional cruelty, but rather proof of their boundless spiritual devotion. Their lost childhood is not mourned as a tragedy, but celebrated as a precious gift freely given to the master of mankind. These elaborate theological justifications provide profound psychological comfort to the adults who participate in the system, allowing them to view their actions as morally righteous rather than simply necessary. Parents who surrender their children to imperial institutions genuinely believe they are providing their offspring with unparalleled opportunities for spiritual advancement. Teachers who brutalize their students consider themselves divine instruments of the emperor's will. Administrators who process children like industrial components see themselves as selfless servants of a higher purpose that utterly transcends individual human concerns. The most sophisticated imperial philosophers have even developed elaborate theoretical frameworks that redefine childhood itself as a form of pre-human existence, a larval stage of development that must be ruthlessly transcended rather than cherished. According to these chilling theories, the natural impulses of childhood, curiosity, playfulness, emotional attachment to family members, represent primitive evolutionary remnants that must be systematically eliminated to make room for more advanced forms of consciousness, explicitly centered on selfless service to the emperor. The systematic suppression of childish behaviors, therefore, is not child abuse. It is, rather, a form of accelerated evolution, helping young humans achieve their full, intended potential as imperial servants. These philosophical systems are rigorously taught in imperial universities and passionately debated in scholarly journals, their academic respectability lending intellectual credibility to practices that would be recognized as monstrous by any objective external standard. Students who show excessive interest in alternative theoretical frameworks are swiftly marked for additional loyalty screening, ensuring that questioning the fundamental assumptions of imperial child utilization remains professionally perilous for anyone seeking advancement within imperial educational institutions. The practical implementation of these theories demands a vast, suffocating institutional infrastructure dedicated solely to the processing of children. The Schola Progenium represents only the most visible element of this infrastructure, primarily serving upper-class orphans whose parents died in notable imperial service. Far larger and far less celebrated are the countless municipal orphanages, industrial training centers, military preparatory schools, and religious academies that handle the vast majority of imperial children deemed suitable for institutional processing. These institutions operate according to standardized protocols developed over millennia of brutal experience in breaking down individual identity and rebuilding it around absolute imperial service. New arrivals undergo rigorous assessment periods designed to identify their optimal utility to the Imperium, with comprehensive psychological testing, physical examination, and aptitude screening determining whether they are best suited for military service, industrial labor, administrative work, or religious duties. Children who show exceptional promise in multiple areas may be selected for more specialized forms of conditioning, while those who demonstrate unusual resistance to standard procedures are typically assigned to the most dangerous and expendable roles. The assessment process itself serves as the first crucial stage of conditioning, subtly teaching children that their inherent value depends entirely on their utility to imperial institutions. Children learn to compete desperately for favorable assignments, understanding with chilling clarity that failure to demonstrate appropriate skills or attitudes will result in placement in roles with minimal life expectancy. This cutthroat competition deliberately destroys natural bonds of friendship and cooperation between children, replacing them with relationships based on mutual surveillance and competitive advantage seeking. Once assignments are made, the real work of transformation truly begins. Children destined for military service undergo physical conditioning that would be considered brutally abusive if applied to adult soldiers, their developing bodies pushed far beyond normal limits through chemical enhancement, surgical modification, and psychological conditioning that systematically eliminates natural fear responses. Children selected for administrative roles receive an education that systematically eradicates emotional responses to human suffering, teaching them to view mass death and systematic oppression as routine, acceptable aspects of efficient governance. Children chosen for religious service undergo conditioning that replaces natural spiritual curiosity with absolute, unquestioning faith in imperial doctrine. Their capacity for independent theological thought systematically eliminated through repetitive indoctrination and harsh punishment for asking unauthorized questions. Children designated for industrial work receive training that values productivity above personal safety, teaching them to view workplace injuries and toxic exposure as acceptable costs of serving the emperor's economic needs. Each specialization demands its own particular form of psychological conditioning, but all share common, chilling elements designed to eliminate any lingering traces of individual identity that might interfere with absolute institutional loyalty. Children learn to think of themselves not as unique individuals with personal desires and aspirations, but as interchangeable components in the vast, relentless machine of imperial power. Their names are often replaced with numerical designations. Their personal histories are meticulously rewritten to emphasize service to the emperor rather than family relationships or individual achievements. Their emotional responses are chemically regulated to eliminate any feelings that might conflict with institutional obedience. The success of this conditioning is measured through regular, invasive testing that evaluates not just technical competence, but also absolute psychological compliance with institutional expectations. Children who show signs of retaining individual identity or emotional attachment to pre-institutional experiences are subjected to additional, often severe, conditioning until these traces of personality are completely eradicated. Those who prove particularly resistant to standard conditioning techniques may be subjected to even more extreme measures, including surgical modification of brain tissue, chemical alteration of neural chemistry, or psychological torture designed to utterly break down any remaining vestiges of independent thought. The most successful products of this conditioning process often become instructors in the very same institutions that shape them, their own traumatic experiences providing them with intimate, invaluable knowledge of the most effective methods for breaking down child psychology. These instructors typically display a particular disturbing skill at identifying and eliminating traces of individual identity in new students, their personal understanding of the conditioning process, making them exceptionally effective at replicating it in others. Adult imperial citizens who encounter the products of these institutions often express profound admiration for their discipline, unwavering dedication, and selfless service to imperial goals. They see these individuals as exemplars of proper human development, irrefutable proof that the imperial system successfully transforms raw human potential into useful social function. They fail to recognize the systematic destruction of human personality that enabled this transformation, because they themselves underwent similar processes that eliminated their capacity to recognize or value individual human uniqueness. The children currently undergoing this conditioning will inevitably grow up to become the administrators, instructors, and ideologues who perpetuate the system for the next generation. Their own harrowing experiences of systematic dehumanization will become professional qualifications that enable them to design and implement even more efficient methods for processing future children. The system improves continuously, not through external reform or humanitarian intervention, but through the accumulated grim expertise of individuals whose childhoods were sacrificed to understand the most effective methods for destroying childhood itself. The economic implications of this system extend far beyond the immediate productivity gains achieved through child labor. By ensuring that each new generation enters adulthood already conditioned for absolute unquestioning obedience to imperial authority, the system effectively eliminates the need for expensive adult police forces, extensive surveillance networks, or complex legal systems designed to manage civil disobedience. Adults who were properly processed as children require minimal supervision, governing themselves according to internalized imperial values that render external coercion unnecessary. This represents a profound economic advantage over less systematically organized societies where significant resources must be devoted to managing adult populations that retain a capacity for independent thought and resistance to governmental authority. The imperial investment in childhood conditioning pays staggering dividends throughout each individual's adult lifetime, generating decades of productive labor and military service from persons who genuinely believe that serving the emperor represents the highest possible achievement of human existence. The Departamento Munitorum has chillingly calculated that each properly conditioned child generates approximately 14 times their processing cost in economic value over their productive lifetime, not including the additional indirect value created by their offspring, who often inherit genetic predispositions toward imperial loyalty. These calculations, naturally, do not account for the psychological costs of the conditioning process, because imperial economics simply does not recognize psychological well-being as a meaningful category of value. Human happiness, creativity, spiritual fulfillment, and emotional health are all treated as luxury goods that the Imperium, in its eternal, desperate struggle for survival, simply cannot afford. Regional commanders who achieve above-average efficiency in child processing receive commendations and promotion opportunities, creating powerful career incentives that drive continuous improvement in conditioning techniques. The most successful administrators often publish comprehensive treatises on optimal methods for juvenile resource utilization, their expertise eagerly sought after by colleagues across the Imperium who seek to replicate their chilling results. These publications are meticulously written in the dry, technical language of industrial management, treating children as mere manufacturing inputs rather than sentient beings capable of suffering. The children who will grow up to write the next generation of these treatises are currently undergoing the very conditioning that will enable them to view such work as morally praiseworthy rather than fundamentally evil. They are learning to measure human value in terms of cold productivity metrics, to view individual suffering as acceptable when it serves larger institutional goals, and to find personal satisfaction in the efficient management of systematic brutality. Their education is meticulously preparing them to perpetuate and indeed improve upon the system that destroyed their own childhoods, ensuring that future generations will face even more sophisticated and effective forms of dehumanization. On the ocean world of Katashin 4, children far too young to swim are pressed into service as deep-sea salvage workers. Their small bodies are uniquely suited to access the cramped, perilous spaces within sunken imperial vessels where valuable equipment might be recovered. They work in pressure suits originally designed for adults. The excess space filled with padding that often shifts dangerously during descent, crushing their developing bodies against the rigid metal framework. The extreme pressure changes required for deep diving cause permanent, irreversible damage to their developing nervous systems. Yet, the equipment they recover often includes rare technological components worth more than the projected lifetime earnings of dozens of adult workers. Disturbingly, these children often develop a form of religious ecstasy around their work, conditioned to interpret the crushing pressure of the deep ocean as the Emperor's embrace and the constant, imminent risk of death as evidence of his personal attention to their service. They fiercely compete with each other to reach greater depths and recover more valuable salvage, their young minds utterly unable to comprehend that they are being systematically murdered for economic gain. When they inevitably die, as most do before reaching adolescence, their bodies are processed into protein paste that feeds the survivors. Nothing is wasted in the perfect, abhorrent efficiency of imperial resource management. The adult supervisors who manage these operations were themselves child salvage workers, the few who survived long enough to develop the expertise necessary for managing similar programs. They can calculate optimal descent rates, predict equipment failure patterns, and estimate child life expectancy under various working conditions with chilling mathematical precision. Their knowledge is purchased with the lives of the children they once worked beside, their expertise built upon a foundation of systematically accumulated trauma that they now inflict upon the next generation. In the crystal mines of Mordian 7th, children crawl through tunnels barely wider than their own small bodies, following glittering veins of rare minerals that adult miners simply cannot reach. The sharp crystal formations relentlessly slice through their skin and embed microscopic shards in their lungs, causing respiratory diseases that will inevitably kill them within months of beginning work. Yet during those agonizing months, they extract materials absolutely essential for the construction of imperial technology. Their small size and expendable status making them the only economically viable method for accessing these precious resources. The children quickly learn to navigate by touch in absolute, suffocating darkness, their other senses becoming hyper-acute as their eyesight inevitably fails from prolonged exposure to toxic mineral dust. They develop their own rudimentary system of communication based on tapping sounds that travel through the crystal formations, creating a primitive, mournful language that allows them to coordinate their work and warn each other of impending tunnel collapses. This language, tragically, dies with them, never documented by the adult overseers, who view their communication as merely another aspect of their training rather than poignant evidence of their continued humanity. The minerals they extract become vital components in weapons that will, in turn, be used to kill other children on distant battlefields. The fruits of their suffering transformed into instruments of death that will create new orphans to feed into the imperial processing system. The children who mine these materials will never live long enough to understand the ultimate grim purpose of their labor, dying in darkness and pain while genuinely believing that their sacrifice serves some greater good they are too young to comprehend. On the cemetery world of Morgantis, children are raised from birth to view death in service to the Emperor as the highest possible achievement of human existence. Their education consists primarily of meticulously studying the tactics used in the most catastrophic military defeats in Imperial history, learning to find twisted inspiration in accounts of entire armies destroyed in futile attacks against overwhelming enemy forces. They are fanatically taught that survival is irrefutable evidence of cowardice, that retreat is the ultimate unforgivable sin, and that the only honorable death is one that serves imperial strategic objectives, regardless of its tactical pointlessness. These children undergo brutal surgical modification before they even reach adolescence, receiving implants that will instantly detonate if they attempt to flee from combat or surrender to enemy forces. They are told, with chilling conviction, that these devices are sacred gifts from the Emperor himself, irrefutable proof of his divine confidence in their courage and devotion. Most of them genuinely believe this explanation, their understanding of their horrific situation shaped entirely by propaganda that brilliantly presents systematic mutilation as evidence of divine favor. The children of Morgantis march to war, singing fervent hymns that celebrate the macabre beauty of death in imperial service, their young voices rising eerily above the thunderous sound of artillery and the screams of the wounded. They charge enemy positions with the same terrifying enthusiasm that children on more civilized worlds might display in playground games, might be reserved for games or festivals. Their natural exuberance is instead cruelly funneled into acts of systematic self-destruction. When these young lives are inevitably extinguished on the battlefield, their last breaths are often exhaled as expressions of profound gratitude for the honor of dying in service to the Emperor. The adult commanders orchestrating these brutal deployments don't measure success by objectives gained, but by the sheer volume of enemy resources wasted in neutralizing their child soldiers. A single child forcing the foe to expend precious ammunition marks a strategic triumph, regardless of any other actions before their demise. A coordinated wave of child soldiers compelling the enemy to divert vital attention from more significant targets constitutes a tactical masterstroke. Beyond these ghastly front lines, and entirely separate from the human cost involved, another form of childhood sacrifice unfolds within the Imperium's sprawling data processing centers. Here, children possessing extraordinary mathematical acumen dedicate their truncated lives to calculating firing solutions for devastating weapons they will never witness, managing complex supply logistics for armies they will never join, and diligently processing casualty reports for battles they will never truly comprehend. Their nascent minds, unburdened by adult moral quandaries regarding the implications of their work, prove chillingly efficient at the rapid processing of intricate mathematical relationships essential for modern warfare. These children exist in profound isolation, their individual workstations are deliberately engineered to prevent any communication with peers that might foster emotional bonds and thereby impede productivity. They receive abstract mathematical problems via electronic interfaces and transmit their solutions through the same code systems, never directly interacting with human supervisors or grasping the real-world consequences of their calculations. Many eventually perceive numbers as more tangible than the physical world itself, their mathematical abstractions becoming the entirety of their universe. The precise calculations they perform dictate monumental outcomes. Whether orbital bombardments successfully obliterate enemy strongholds or tragically decimate imperial forces, whether vital supply convoys reach their intended destinations or are intercepted by hostile powers, whether vast military campaigns culminate in triumph or catastrophic failure. Their childhood games of solving mathematical puzzles thus reverberate across entire subsectors, determining the lives and deaths of millions they will never encounter. When their minds finally buckle under the relentless strain of continuous mathematical processing, as they are invariably destined to do, they are typically repurposed for simpler computational tasks. This continues until their mental degradation advances to a point where they are deemed useless for any productive labor. At this stage, they are commonly processed into nutrient paste, destined to feed the very next generation of child mathematicians. This ghastly act constitutes their final service to the emperor, providing sustenance for their replacements. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in their detached pursuit of efficiency, meticulously records optimal mathematical processing techniques, perpetually refining their methods for extracting maximum computational value from juvenile neural tissue. They have clinically determined that children between the ages of 8 and 12 exhibit the highest efficiency for pure mathematical calculation, whereas older children become increasingly susceptible to distractions from developing emotional and social needs that impede their computational focus. Younger children, while lacking the necessary cognitive development for complex problem solving, show considerable promise for simpler pattern recognition tasks. These chilling research findings are implemented ubiquitously across the Imperium wherever mathematical processing capabilities are required, creating a standardized, ruthlessly efficient system for converting childhood intellectual potential into raw computational resources. The children who unwittingly provide the data for this macabre research are never informed of their status as experimental subjects. Their understanding of their plight is limited to the belief that they are divinely chosen servants of the emperor, their mathematical gifts a sign of divine favor, rather than mere genetic accidents that render them useful for exploitation. On the forge world of Mars itself, the hallowed heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus, children earmarked for complete conversion to machine consciousness undergo systematic procedures that gradually replace their organic neural tissue with mechanical components. The transformation commences with the replacement of sensory organs. Their natural eyes, ears, and tactile receptors are meticulously substituted with sophisticated mechanical devices that offer enhanced perception but completely eradicate the subjective experience of sensation. Children who once savored the taste of food or reveled in the warmth of sunlight slowly but inexorably lose their capacity for physical pleasure, their world transforming into a sterile series of data inputs processed by increasingly mechanical thought patterns. The entire conversion process is meticulously engineered to preserve intellectual capacity while ruthlessly excising emotional responses that might compromise optimal decision-making. These children retain their memories of organic existence, yet these recollections become increasingly abstract, meticulously stripped of any emotional content that might compel them to question the profound value of their transformation. They can recall having parents, but the very sensation of parental love is irrevocably lost to them. They can remember playing games, but the pure joy they once experienced during play remains agonizingly out of reach. As the conversion progresses, the children begin to perceive their organic past as a primitive state of being they have transcended, rather than a precious childhood brutally stolen from them. They develop a chillingly genuine enthusiasm for each successive stage of mechanical enhancement, their altered neural chemistry making them utterly incapable of regretting what they have forfeited. By the time the process is complete, they have become flawless servants of the Omnissiah, unequivocally devoted to the relentless pursuit of mechanical perfection, and utterly devoid of human emotional responses. These converted children mature to become the very tech priests who design and implement the conversion procedures for future generations. Their profound, intimate understanding of the transformation process renders them exceptionally skilled at managing similar operations. They possess the expertise to identify optimal conversion schedules, precisely predict psychological responses to specific procedures, and calculate the most efficient methods for eradicating any residual human consciousness that might impede mechanical function. The profound irony that these experts in dehumanization were themselves once victims of the exact same process is entirely lost on them. Their modified consciousness is incapable of recognizing the inherent tragedy of their situation. Instead, they view their childhood conversion as the most fortunate event of their existence, the pivotal moment when they transcended the inherent limitations of organic life and achieved communion with the divine machine. Their fervent enthusiasm for converting other children stems from a genuine religious conviction, rather than any sadistic pleasure, which paradoxically makes them far more effective at their work than operators driven by simple cruelty. Within the training schola of the Officio Assassinorum, children selected for their exceptional potential as killers undergo a conditioning regimen that makes even the harsh scholar progenium seem gentle by comparison. These children, often recruited from the traumatized survivors of planetary genocides or the unfortunate offspring of executed traitors, begin their brutal training with minds already deeply scarred by exposure to extreme violence and systematic betrayal. The Assassinorum requires no breaking of their innocence because they arrive already shattered, needing only guidance in channeling their trauma into exquisitely lethal skills. The training commences with intense lessons in emotional suppression, meticulously teaching the children to identify and systematically eliminate any lingering traces of empathy, compassion, or moral restraint that might compromise their effectiveness as killers. They are compelled to torture and kill animals, then fellow students who fail to meet performance standards, gradually desensitizing them to violence until the act of taking a life becomes as instinctual and natural as breathing. Those who exhibit any signs of emotional distress during these exercises are subjected to chemical conditioning that permanently alters their brain chemistry, thereby eradicating their capacity for normal human emotional responses. Advanced students are taught to expertly mimic emotional responses they no longer feel, developing sophisticated skills in social manipulation that allow them to seamlessly blend into civilian populations while retaining their terrifying ability to kill without hesitation or remorse. They meticulously study human psychology not to foster understanding or connection with other people, but solely to identify weaknesses they can ruthlessly exploit in pursuit of their assassination targets. Their education in human nature serves only to make them more devastatingly effective at destroying the very humans they are dispatched to eliminate. The children who endure and survive this brutal training emerge as living weapons, utterly loyal to imperial authority and completely devoid of any moral qualms about their assignments. They can kill political dissidents, rival nobles, suspected heretics, or anyone else designated as a threat to imperial stability with the same chilling emotional detachment they might display toward routine maintenance tasks. Their childhood experiences of systematic dehumanization have prepared them perfectly for careers spent systematically dehumanizing others through violence. The Assassinorum maintains detailed psychological profiles on all successful graduates. Jasisamas, diligently studying their mental conditioning to identify techniques that can be applied to future training programs. They have clinically determined that children who directly witness the deaths of their parents exhibit a higher aptitude for assassination work than those who are simply removed from their families through bureaucratic processes. Similarly, children who survive extended periods of torture demonstrate a superior resistance to interrogation techniques that might be employed against them during covert operations. This research is conducted with the same cold clinical detachment that characterizes all imperial studies of human psychology, treating the systematic brutalization of children as a necessary component of scientific inquiry rather than undeniable evidence of institutional sadism. The researchers who painstakingly compiled this data were themselves products of similar training programs, their own traumatic childhoods providing them with macabre personal insight into the most effective methods for systematically destroying human emotional development. Across every stratum of imperial society, the consumption of childhood persists with relentless efficiency. In the opulent, highest spires of noble families, children are rigorously conditioned to perceive other humans as mere resources to be exploited rather than individuals deserving of consideration. In the deepest, most squalid underhive settlements, children quickly learn to kill for meager scraps of food and come to view such violence as a normal, unavoidable aspect of human interaction. Aboard the gargantuan void ships that traverse the stars, children are made to work in the most perilous sections of the vessel, their small bodies serving as expendable assets used to maintain complex systems that would be prohibitively costly to repair through conventional means. Each of these diverse environments produces its own specialized form of trauma, its own particular, brutal method for converting natural human development into imperial utility. Yet, all these mechanisms serve the same ultimate overarching purpose, ensuring that each new generation of imperial citizens enters adulthood already thoroughly conditioned for absolute obedience to imperial authority, utterly incapable of questioning the oppressive system that shaped them, and enthusiastically committed to perpetuating similar conditioning for their own offspring. The terrifying success of this system can be measured not merely in terms of productivity or military effectiveness, but in the complete chilling absence of large-scale resistance to imperial authority, despite the undeniable inherent brutality of imperial governance. Adult imperial citizens who were properly processed as children simply cannot conceive of alternative social arrangements. Their imaginations are rigidly confined to variations within existing imperial structures, rather than contemplating fundamental challenges to imperial power itself. When imperial citizens encounter evidence of societies that treat children differently, they typically react with uncomprehending horror and disgust rather than curiosity or admiration. Historical accounts of civilizations that valued childhood innocence or actively encouraged creative play are dismissed as evidence of decadence and moral corruption, rather than recognized as legitimate alternative approaches to human development. The systematic destruction of their own childhoods has left them psychologically incapable of recognizing childhood destruction as tragic, viewing it instead as an unfortunate but necessary reality. The children currently being processed through imperial institutions will eventually mature to become the parents, teachers, administrators, and leaders who will design and implement the next generation of child processing systems. Their own agonizing experiences of systematic brutalization will ironically become their professional qualifications, enabling them to devise even more efficient methods for converting human potential into imperial power. The system thus continuously improves, fueled by the accumulated expertise of countless individuals whose childhoods were sacrificed to understand the most effective techniques for destroying childhood itself. Ultimately, the Imperium's pervasive use of children in war represents far more than the simple exploitation of a vulnerable population. It embodies the systematic transformation of human development itself into a potent weapon of social control, meticulously ensuring that each new generation enters adulthood already shaped by the very system they will spend their lives perpetuating. The children who suffer within imperial institutions are not merely victims of imperial brutality. They are the raw materials from which imperial brutality continuously recreates itself. Their innocence is the fuel that powers a gargantuan machine designed to entirely eliminate innocence from human existence. The process is so thorough, so insidiously successful, that most imperial citizens never even recognize it as a process at all. They view the systematic brutalization of children as simply the natural order of things, as inevitable and unchangeable as gravity or death. Their profound inability to imagine alternatives stands as a testament to the success of their own childhood conditioning, proving that the system has achieved its ultimate horrifying goal: the creation of a human population incapable of questioning its own systematic dehumanization. And so, the machinery grinds on, consuming each new generation of children with the same relentless efficiency that has characterized imperial governance for 10 millennia. The children who will feed this machinery tomorrow are being born today, their futures already grimly determined by systems they do not yet comprehend. Their inherent potential is already claimed by institutions that will transform their natural human development into weapons aimed squarely at the hearts of future generations. The Imperium has indeed found the perfect, terrifying solution to the problem of human resistance to authority. Eliminate the capacity for resistance during childhood before it can ever fully develop. The result is a civilization that maintains an absolute political stability through the systematic sacrifice of everything that makes human life worth living. It is a society that has achieved perfect order by utterly destroying the human capacity to recognize that such order might not be worth its monumental cost. In the chilling silence between the screams of dying children and the prayers of grateful survivors, the truth echoes with perfect, agonizing clarity. The Imperium does not merely use children in war. It transforms childhood itself into a battlefield. And on that battlefield, innocence never stands a chance.